Welcome to episode 106 of the Sports Geek podcast. This week I chat sponsorship and dog food with Eric Fernandez and Kobe retires.
Welcome to the Sports Geek podcast, the podcast built for sports digital and sports business professionals.
And now, here's your host who attends sports events to beat jet lag, Sean Callanan.
Thanks, DJ Joel. Yes, attending sports events within 12 hours of getting off a plane is the best way to beat jet lag. I've done that multiple times earlier this year at an Arsenal game, and then again when I came back from the States, heading to the MCG just 6 hours after getting to the flight. It is a great way to beat jet lag. Beer may or may not be involved. My name is Sean Callanan, and you are listening to the Sports Geek podcast, either on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or my favourite podcast app, Pocket Casts. Really, people, get on it. It's one of the best apps out there for listening to podcasts. As always, you can contact me, Sean at sportsgeekhq.com. Will get me that old-fashioned way, email, or on the Twitter, at Sean Callanan or at SportsGeek. Will get me, or you can even use that thing called Facebook. I hear it's going to be big. Sean Callanan Speaks for my page or / Sports Geek for the Sports Geek page. This week, I catch up with good friend of mine, Eric Fernandez from SportsDesk Media. Met Eric way back in 2010 at a conference and been caught up a few times since then at conferences like Seat. So good to catch up with him to discuss the world of sponsorship. He's been in the game for a long time and seen the changes in the industry, especially from a data and a digital point of view. So we dive deep on the idea around data and how powerful it is for sports teams, and really put it out there that if you're not getting involved in this space and understanding your data and being able to pitch that to your sponsors, that there is a danger that you will lose that money in what Eric and I discuss. And then later on, after the interview with Eric, I look back at Kobe's retirement announcement with a bit of an analysis from a sports geek point of view, what he did right, what he did wrong, who won from a platform point of view, and what he could have done to make more money, like he needs to make more money after making over $500 million over his career. But first, here's my chat with Eric Fernandez from SportsDesk Media. Very happy to welcome a good friend of mine, known him for a long time now, at least in internet years, Eric Fernandez from SportsDesk Media. Welcome to the Sports Geek podcast.
Welcome. Thank you for having me, Sean. Excited to be here. Yeah,
as I said, I've known each other for a long time. I think it was 5 years ago we first met at a conference in Sydney, and that is a long time in internet years. Formerly you were with AT&T and on the sponsorship side of things. I wanted to get a bit of your perspective on how the sponsorship game has changed over the last 15 years.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. In many cases, not a lot has changed, but in many cases, a lot has changed. I think what when I look back, as a brand marketer, when I was at AT&T, we had one simple goal, and it was how do we take fan passion and make that brand passion. And I think that is still very relevant today, that if you look at the core reason why a brand wants to partner and sponsor, it is still very much about leveraging that inherent affinity that a fan has for a team or an individual, and how we can actually, as a brand, tap into that. So I don't think that's changed much. Now, how we do it has really changed a lot. And in the old days where you'd get an outfield wall sign, or you'd get you'd buy naming rights. It used to be about the inventory. It's now all about the activation and the ideas. And I think what technology has allowed us to do is, kind of remove the shackles around creativity, and allow us to really bring creative ideas to life, and whether that's content, whether that's just consumer engagement and promotions, but allowed us to really do that. And to me, that's the most exciting part about what's changed, is things that we wanted to do and had only imagined to do, 5 to even 7 years ago, we're able to do it today. I remember off the top of my head, we did one of the last programs I did before I left AT&T in 2007 was a program called the world's largest pep rally, where we were activating our 40 some odd different college partnerships here in the U.S. through giving one school a chance to win the Dave Matthews Band come and do a concert at their school. And this was the days before social media, so Facebook wasn't nearly anywhere near as the scale. I don't even think Twitter had very many followers. But before social media, you're starting to see the consumers and students generating content and pictures and videos and creating websites. And now I look at the ability to take a program like that and how we could, instead of engaging 5 million consumers, which we did back then through digital means, we could probably do 50 million within a matter of a week. So those are the things that really just excite me. Is what's changed the most is the ability for creativity to be amplified and brought to the consumers in a fun way.
And one of the things you were lucky enough to sort of be in the ground floor at AT&T, I remember us speaking about it, is when the iPhone came out and just the opportunity that as a device gave marketers, but definitely sports marketers, a way to better connect with the fans. What was it like in that early segment at AT&T, launching the iPhone and then seeing the opportunities develop from there? Yeah,
I still to this day, have that as a vivid memory as being the game changer. Prior to that, you probably recall when we started to do one-to-one communication engagement, a lot of it was text-based. So short codes, SMS was very much a key way of connecting and engaging, and something, whether you're in venue running a promotion as a brand, that ability to get, if you've got the dot race, and now you can have the consumers, pick the dot that they think is going to win, and if they actually correctly guess it, then they can win some sort of prize. And that ability to kind of engage and interact was starting to get there. What we started to see was, there's a lot of limitations to where text was, and the iPhone really brought that down, because it essentially put a computing device into the hands of every single consumer. And now you kind of fast forward even almost 10 years later or 8 years later, we start to get very excited about the eminent data that comes from those interactions and those consumers, and that ability to now create not just very robust and dynamic interaction, whether that's through personalized video content that might go out, but the underlying ability to measure the engagement and the interaction that an individual has with a team or a brand, but also all the underlying data to really make that much more personal and relevant. So that notion of if we know that, Sean, you only care about the Golden State Warriors and you only care about Steph Curry, or that's who you primarily care about, that we can really customize that communication and that message that goes to you in that content, that it's you're not worrying about the other things that maybe the brand wants you to see, or the team wants you to see, or the league wants you to see, but really it's about serving you up the content that's most important to you.
Yeah, and that's where the power of the data is in understanding that relevance. And you're saying before about moving from inventory to activation. It's the data that tells us how we can go about it and who we can target. Whether it's me as a Steph Curry fan or someone else as a Kevin Durant fan, you can prime that message to those people. And then from a sponsorship side of things, there's so many opportunities. Do you want to talk about some of the stuff you did with the Cleveland Browns, and when you dived into their data, some of the new and unique opportunities that came from that?
Right. So I think there's maybe two headlines I give you there. Well, first is data is meaningless, but insights are what's valuable. And secondarily, I don't want to call it a data-driven world, because I don't think data as a marketer, not just a sports marketer, as a marketer, we don't let data drive our decisions, but data helps us inform the decisions. The human behind it and the qualitative aspect still has to be very important. But from kind of bring that back to a sports marketing standpoint is, data is allowing us as sports marketers to essentially turn fans into inventory. So what do I mean by that? And I'll put it into context with the Cleveland Browns. When we started SportsDesk, one of the challenges we saw in the marketplace, and a lot of this related back to my AT&T days, was teams by and large just weren't well equipped or weren't as up to date on being able to translate their fans into terms that are relevant to marketers. So, as a brand marketer for a large telecommunications brand, I wanted to know how well a team could segment their fans into the way I segmented my target audiences. But we would hear things about avid fans, casual fans. We'd see maybe some generic data around demographics. But really, ultimately, being able to match up my marketing segments in a team's fan base wasn't existent. And I think data now, because of the proliferation, allows you to do that. The ability now that one of the things with our platform that we've done is the ability to take a team's online fans and really translate them from uniques and page views into profiles and personas that we can now segment and put that in terms of how brands want. So with the Cleveland Browns, for example, at any point in time, we can help them understand how many of their fans are in market to buy an automobile that is very meaningful to their Ford partner. We can help them understand how many of their fans, their online fans, are actually have their wireless their service through AT&T versus Verizon, Sprint, or T-Mobile, that they can now create retention offers, co-branded retention offers versus acquisition offers. So the data is allowing us to get very insightful, again, moving from data to insights that then create those marketing strategies that then you can actually execute through digital media. So I think one of the best examples that we did is we were helping the Browns understand their fan base, and our analyst was looking at their data and noticed two really important things. One is the Browns have a very large propensity or high propensity for pet ownership, in particular dogs. And those pet owners had a very strong affinity for the Purina brand. Now, just kind of coincidentally, the Cleveland Browns football team, they think, I don't know if how aware over in Australia, but their mascot is a dog, and they have their super fan sections called the Dog Pound. So we brought this information to them and said, look, have you guys ever approached the pet food category or Purina or a pet retailer? And that was never a category that was on their radar. And all of that led to this idea of creating an integrated sponsorship against that category, because the data, the insights from the data, supported a good story and a narrative for them to be able to go sell that as a category. To take it a step further, looking at how we can turn fans into inventory, because we have that underlying data, and through media targeting technologies, whether it's retargeting or through modeling, we can now create audience segments of Cleveland Browns fans who are pet owners, and not just reach those fans when they're on clevelandbrowns.com, but we can also reach them when they're checking their mail in Gmail, or when they're checking their horoscope on Yahoo, or reading an article on ESPN. So that ability to turn that affinity that a fan has for the property into a live piece of digital inventory is really where we see the marketplace going. Of teams are now going to be the front door for any time a fan or a sponsor wants to connect with a fan of theirs, whether it's on a property that they control and own, or it's anywhere in a digital space. The teams are going to be the front door for that, because they've got the richest amount of data on that fan base, or have the potential for the richest amount of data that can lead to those insights and that connectivity.
And the thing that's really important there is the Purinas of the world will have a hard time trying to figure out if Cleveland has that affinity. So they won't come knocking on the door anymore and say, oh, we want to be associated with you because we think. The team has to be proactive in seeing these opportunities. And like I said, you can present a really great narrative and story behind, why your fans and this segment of fans, will have a strong affinity with the brand and be able to have cut through and get the returns they're looking for. But you've got to be able to understand, have that insight. So I completely agree on that everyone gets overwhelmed with the data. It's being able to go in and get those insights that are the invaluable piece to be able to say, this is is why our team, and it's not the total number, it's not every single person that likes you, it's the segment, because you only need to sell to that segment, not to everybody, which is normally a flaw that that happens on both on the team side and the sponsorship side. They get drawn in by the big number, thinking they're going to reach the big number, but not everyone is in market for a new car, or not everyone is a dog owner. It's no point pushing out your message to those people that aren't interested.
No, that's exactly right. And I think this is where you start to look at, again, if you go back to the core of what's not changed in the last 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years of sponsorship is how do you turn fan passion into brand passion? I would be willing to tell you that, Purina finds dog owners and the ability to move share of dog owners by 1% of fandom of a team just as significant as on a more maybe of a micro level on a perpetual basis that an automotive company would want to know who are the 5,000 to 6,000 fans that are in market at this point in time to buy a car, that I can leverage my relationship with the team to create an affinity offer that's going to get them to come take a test drive or come look at my dealership. And you start to look at that's not about a team touting hundreds of thousands or millions of fans, but that's really talking about that very narrow, rich audience that can be connected and moved because they can help actually connect that brand to that particular fan base, and that's ultimately where I think the marketplace is moving, and that's going to be driven by the ability for teams to really understand and not be afraid of how they can manipulate and understand data to ultimately drive those conversations. Because you're right, the Purinas of the world aren't going to go knocking on the doors of teams, or that's going to be less of the case of the brand actually doing that and finding that versus it is the team really discovering and uncovering those unique opportunities that they have.
Because again, if we're using the Purinas of the world can just go to the Facebooks or to third party people and say find us all pet owners and go to them direct, but they can't leverage the brand affinity that a team has. So, if teams aren't going to do it, the savvy marketers will still do it without the team association. So it's really it's a place you have to be, otherwise that money won't be on the table anymore for sports.
That's true, and I think the teams also are at risk of essentially to some degree being disintermediated in that process. So I think if you look, for example, here in the U.S., Subway, the quick serve restaurant, for years has done a really nice job of activating their brand through endorsement of athletes without having to pay large rights fees to teams or leagues. So you look at their relationship with Michael Phelps. They are, finding that instead of the passionate relationship being for, a fan of a particular team, they find it for an individual, and they essentially are disintermediating the team or the league in that process. They're not going to USA Swimming, or they're not going to the NFL or the Washington Redskins with Robert Griffin III or any of their other athletes. They're going directly to the source, and they're using that athlete or that individual as the mouthpiece for their brand and having a lot of success in doing it. And I think if teams are not more aggressive in really essentially understanding and building those direct connections with where they've got those pockets of opportunities for brands, there's some risk that they could be disintermediated in that, because athletes are getting smarter, agencies are getting smaller, the IMGs, the CAAs of the world. Their investments that they're making now are in data capabilities, data insights, data infrastructure, and they're building that on purpose because they want to make sure that they are, they've got those capabilities, and A, they're not being disintermediated, but B, where can they do more of a service to their clients and athletes versus the reliance on teams and leagues to have to provide a tremendous amount of that insight and information.
Yeah, completely, especially on that athlete side of things, as athletes are moving into their own media entity type properties, where we saw Kobe Bryant retire recently, push all the traffic to the Players Tribune and his own channels over the teams. That's definitely going to be a challenge over the next 18 months to onwards, I think, as athletes move in that direction. One other one I wanted to ask you about. They recently visited Melbourne, and I spoke about it previously on the podcast. The UFC did a really great job of activating Etihad Stadium when they were here, and a really massive data focus in capturing as much data and as many data points as they could around the fan zone that they built out. What's some of the insights you've been able to garner from looking at their data, and what are they looking to get out of their data?
Yeah, so we've done some work with them over the last year, a little over a year, on helping them really as they run in the neighborhood of 12 to 13 large events, fights every year that are largely driven by pay-per-view. What they have asked us to help them, and where we've helped them, is really looking at online fan segmentation, because what's unique with them is you have a lot of segments of fans who are cord shavers or cord cutters. So, not necessarily having a traditional television cable service or satellite agreement where they can go and spend $39 or $49 to watch a fight, and are much more reliant on doing that so in kind of an online pay-per-view. But it's interesting because there's different audience types, there's different messages that resonate, there's different financials and economics behind those various products. And what's interesting to do is go in and create models driven by data, but from these different interactions, like you've mentioned, that can really start to identify where is a segment of fans who we know does not subscribe to TV service, where they're going to be a over the top or a digital first buy, versus those that we know can subscribe to and who their television subscription provider is, to help them really facilitate and make that decision. Is really some of the areas that we've helped them with, is to kind of gain that traction and essentially uncover different audience segments. I think what's also interesting in that same vein is, when you separate those two audiences, you also start to see the very different consumption patterns they have for different brands and products, and how does that match up with different products and services that their sponsors have. So looking at, in the automotive category of, how can you now potentially use pay-per-view, either discounted or free, as a hook that could be part of tied to a partner that's bringing that as a value-added service to an individual, to a fan, but that's going to be messaged very differently. And how do you first identify that through the data, but then secondarily through specific targeting of digital media, can now put that right offer, right product, right brand product in front of that consumer.
I mean, it's really important. Like I describe them as audiences of opportunity. Be able to be able to identify these audiences that you can target, because you can't blindly go and say, well, this is working for the MLB. They've got the over-the-top service. That's where we want to go. Or, we can see the WWE has finally got there. It's got its million subscribers on its service. We need to go this way. Being able to go and shore up that data and say, well, yeah, we have got these cord cutters. We've been reading all the reports of the dips in subscribers with ESPN around the whole Grantland shutdown, and how the subscriber base is looking there. You need to be able to look at getting those audiences to say, well, if we're going to make this leap into this different area, or pitch our service in a different form, at least you can now look at the data and say, well, there is an audience there of people who like our product, that are in this space, that it makes sense for us to segment our offering to these fans in a completely different manner. Whereas, again, if we look back, 10 or 15 years ago, there was a far more leap of faith there, because we didn't have a lot of data around the customer and consumer behaviour. Right.
No, you're exactly right. I think what strikes me in that in that thought, in that stream, is just exactly you said, is it's the customization, and it's not even the customization of a message or an offer, but it's really Personalization, I think maybe is a little bit overused, but it's really around that notion of relevancy. And I'll give you the prime example. We work a lot of here domestically in the U.S. with a number of Division I colleges and universities. And we just finished, for example, helping probably 25 different schools market football, college football to their constituents. Their segmentation, by and large, tends to be product focused. So we're going to start by selling season tickets, and then we're going to move to mini plans, and then we're going to move to single games. And those messages are targeted to the same audiences. Well, a kid who is, a young individual who's 25 years, who's a graduate, who is a alumni, who's very passionate about their school, they're not necessarily in the marketplace for a season ticket with a large donation, but they would be looking at a mini plan, or there's certain single games that they want to go to. Well, why are we wasting media impressions and effort against that audience? Why are we not creating macro segments at the beginning? Why are we not looking at it? And by the way, with working with 25 colleges, you can come out with 3 to 4 macro segments for every school that is relevant and applicable, and you can now start to customize their current product offering and the offers, and from day one, promote relevantly the right product that's the right fit to the right audience. And there's no reason why everyone shouldn't be doing those sorts of things from day one. And it doesn't, it's not you don't have to be fully immersed, and you're not necessarily boiling the ocean and taking in all your potential data sources. You're using some very, basic data sources to at least be smarter and a little bit more sophisticated in your execution efforts, which can go a long way in actually producing better returns.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It's a bit of changing the model. It's, what you just described there of season tickets and mini plans and game tickets that's the way it's always been done, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right way. Now that we know that these kind of people or this audience, they don't buy season tickets, then it doesn't make sense to push out that marketing message to them. I do the same stuff when analysing the content that's getting pushed out by the teams, and looking at what audiences that's trying to serve. And too often that we see a lot of the content's being produced for the super avid fan that is consuming everything. But there's other segments there that they want to reach, they want to sell tickets to, that are largely underserved. Whether it's the out of market fan or the fan that is only is a family is only going to come a certain time. You've got to try to match up your marketing message from a ticket sales point of view, also with your content, to make sure that all of those different audiences get served. And if you haven't looked at your audiences, if you haven't seen who's consuming your content, who's checking out your website, all of those things, it's very hard to have that informed decision, to have that insight, as you said earlier.
Yeah, no, that's. I couldn't agree with you more. I think you're dead on in all aspects there, and I think we're seeing the marketplace change, which is good. People are evolving. I mean, the percentages of those that are at least not curious about the potential of where data, digital, social can lead, we're starting to really see that change, because I think the second component to it as well is we're seeing a really big shift in much more integrated marketing efforts. So how am I really syncing up and making sure that my my television, my digital, my social, my radio effort are all well organized, well synced, and I think the underlying data that you get from digital can influence those other channels, to allow you to be a little bit smarter about maybe where your traditional spend is going.
Yeah, completely agree. Thank you very much, Eric, for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me, Sean, and hopefully it won't be another 5 years before we get to do this again.
Exactly. You can find Eric, send him a tweet, eman14, send Eric a tweet, tell him that you've listened to this podcast, or follow up with him at sportsdeskmedia.com. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Sean. Take care.
Sign up for Sports Geek News at sportsgeekhq.com/sign up now.
Thanks again to Eric, also known as eman14 on Twitter. So please send him a tweet, tell him that you've listened to this episode 106. If you want to include a link, sportsgeekhq.com/106 will find this episode. Thank you very much to Eric for coming on the podcast. And question for the podcast: are you pixeling your website? Do you have a pixel, either a Google one from a tracking point of view and remarketing point of view, or a Facebook pixel to install? So Facebook will tell you who is visiting your site, what pages they're looking at, and some of the demographic details. If you haven't done that, if you haven't set up Facebook Business Manager, you can do that by simply just downloading our simple Business Manager guide by going to sportsgeekhq.com/business manager. And that way you can set up Facebook Business Manager, which allows you to what I call Facebook for Business, or Facebook Big Boy Pants. It's the way that Facebook wants businesses to operate. It helps you manage your ad accounts and your pages, all via your company emails, not via your Hotmail or your Gmail or whatever email you've connected from a Facebook point of view. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but once it's set up, you can get your pixels all installed and start letting the visibility of that data throughout your organisation, letting your commercial guys understand the data of people hitting your website, those kind of things. It becomes really, really important. Last week, Kobe Bryant announced his retirement. He did it both on Facebook and on Twitter. I obviously got a notification and saw a few people tweeting about it, so I dive into the stats to see where the traffic was coming from and what platform was driving the traffic initially, just to see how it goes. If you don't know, a little bit of a Sports Geek trick. If you're using Bitly links, or if someone you know is using a Bitly link, if you want to look at the stats for any Bitly link, just put a plus at the end of the short link and it will bring up the Bitly report. So I did that with Kobe Bryant's Dear Basketball. After 2 hours sending out the tweet, Kobe drove nearly 1 million clicks. Now, you know, one of the things that caused problems for the Players Tribune, where he sent all the traffic, was they weren't prepared for 1 million clicks, so the site was down. So one of the lessons was to look at scalability and being able to handle large amounts of traffic. Normally not a concern for most sports teams if they've got a good infrastructure from a back end point of view, but it was obviously something that potentially Derek Jeter, who runs the Players Tribune, and a few of the athletes that are involved, it was probably a hard lesson for them to learn. So Twitter definitely dominates breaking news, even 24 hours later when it went to 1.5 million clicks. This is just from the original tweet and the original post on Facebook, not from everyone else sharing it. A lot of that traffic half that traffic was from Twitter. I was a bit surprised that Facebook did not catch up after 24 hours, but I think that was mainly to do with the way that Kobe posted the message on Facebook, where he did it with a picture and then the link to the Dear Basketball poem. I think if you had have done it as a link style post, it would have garnered far more clicks. But obviously, pictures are more from a sharing point of view. So a lot of people liked the post and shared it, and probably saw it later, so they didn't need to read the poem or see the poem. So it was pretty much them just showing support. So it was really, if you are looking for traffic, definitely throw it up on Facebook as a link. Because if you want shares and reach and all those kind of things, then put it up as an image. It's easier for people to share an image on Facebook. But Twitter definitely won the war on that. As far as what missed opportunities for Kobe, well, for one, obviously the site being down was a bit of a pain. But I do think he missed the opportunity from an email capture point of view. If you remember when LeBron James opened up his Twitter account at King James, his third tweet. It wasn't really well written or anything. It was simply a link, again, a Bitly link to his website, and it was LeBronJames.com, and it simply just had an email capture there. I think if Kobe had have done something from an email capture point of view, he would have garnered a lot of emails with that announcement. At least the Players Tribune, for the time it was up, did have a Facebook pixel on it. If you don't install the Facebook Pixel Helper on Chrome, you wouldn't know these things. It's always nice to turn that on to, one, test your Facebook pixels, but then also to see who's pixeling you. So at least they've done that. So there's a really big opportunity for Derek Jeter and Kobe, I think he's associate editor or something like that at the Players Tribune, to market back to those fans and pull them back and get more traffic down the track. But I really think if they'd done something as simple as an email page that says, do you want a PDF version of Kobe's letter? We'll send it to you. If you give us an email, he would have got a lot of emails, and it definitely would have sold a lot had he provided an upgrade to a printed version. They were prepared in that they handed the Lakers 18,000 pre-printed letters to hand out that night at the Staples Center. So they were prepared in that sense, but I think they probably left a fair bit of money on the table had they, collected many, many email addresses, which they would have. And then the second side of it would have been, to upgrade to a printed version for, say, $19.95. I think there would have been a lot of Kobe fans that would have requested to get a printed version of that poem. That's without me even reviewing it from a pro's point of view, just from a fan collectible point of view. And the example I used in the post that I did on SportsGeekHQ.com was the guys at Cards Against Humanity, what they did for Black Friday. For those of you who don't know Cards Against Humanity, it's a terrible, terrible game for terrible, terrible humans. It's a funny game, but for their Black Friday special, they pretty much put up a page that said, give us $5 for nothing. And they raised $71,000 in doing that. And you can actually check out the link and what they spent on that with that $71,000 that they raised. So if they can raise $71,000 for selling nothing, I have no doubt that Kobe could have sold his letter for upwards of six figures. What are your thoughts? How would you have handled, how would you have tweaked Kobe's retirement announcement? Was it the right platforms? Did he miss an opportunity by not putting something up on Instagram? I thought that was a bit of a strange one, not to put at least something up on Instagram. It would have got a little bit more traction. But yeah, the main lessons from mine is he could have captured some email, and obviously if you're going to send it to a site, make sure the site stays up. One last thing before the end of the podcast, digital health check. You can check out the digital health check, and I talked a little bit about it in my conversation with Eric. You can go to sportsgeekhq.com/digital health check. Getting some really great insights from the few that we're doing at the moment. Some of the things that are falling out of the process, some new content for the underserved fans, as I spoke about with Eric then. Fans that you want to target, that you want to hit up with your message, you want to sell tickets to or merch to, or you want to better engage, you want to make sure that you are serving them traffic if you're going to hit them up with a marketing message later. So we've been able to identify that there's been fan segments that aren't being served enough content, so we've produced some content to fill that need. But the biggest outcome for most of the ones that we're running at the minute is finding inventory that it hasn't been sold. So that's being produced by the digital team. The fans love it. Being able to take that inventory, packaging it up into a nice product, to working with the commercial team to then sell it to sponsors. So that's the biggest takeaway. And normally, on average at the moment, between $10,000 and $15,000 worth of inventory has been found just by going through the process of the digital health check. Also, one of the big issues from an executive hiring point of view is understanding the resourcing required from a digital point of view. And by going through the content audit, we're able to have high visibility of the resourcing demands by saying, look, this is actually how many pieces of content that this team produced. This is why they are stretched. But then tying dollar amounts to the content that is being delivered and in what the commercial outcomes that your commercial team gets, it's far easier to see and have that decision. And like Eric said, data is meaningless. Insights are invaluable. The insights that come out of it are, we want more video because video drives commercial results, we need to hire someone from a video point of view, and you can do that with the information that more video will result in more sponsorship, which will result in more dollars in for digital. So it's a better understanding of the dollars driven by digital. So go to sportsgeekhq.com/digital health check to check that out. Fill out the box. You'll get all the information. It's obligation free. Check it out, please. If you've got any questions at all or have a query, please send me an email or send me a tweet. Sean@sportsgeekhq.com. Happy to have a chat about the process, how it works, and how it potentially can help you with what you're doing. Until next episode, my name is Sean Callanan from SportsGeek. If you can leave a review on iTunes or Stitcher or the like, I would very much appreciate it. Until then, cheers.
Please leave a review on iTunes. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/iTunes. Check out which teams work with SportsGeek at sportsgeekhq.com/clients. Like the Sports Geek podcast? Find us on facebook.com/sportsgeek. Thanks for listening to the Sports Geek Podcast.